Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jeremiah, and we got quite a full house. A lot of people still joining in, so we're going to take a couple minutes here to get going on the first of a really incredible series on SketchUp that Daniel is going to be doing for us. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Daniel Tal, where have you been, first of all? But he is a practiced, trained, educated landscape architect. So that's what makes this so amazing is having the ability to take a tool as amazing and brilliant as SketchUp is and make that work for us in the landscape architecture side of things. You know, SketchUp was designed first and foremost for buildings, and like every other thing that in our industry, everything seems to be done for the architect. But there are ways to make it work amazingly for us, and so this is going to be the first in a series of showing off SketchUp, and I think I will stop yappering here and hand this over to Daniel. And we got. Well, boy, people are still just arriving like mad, by the way. But reminding everyone, there is a question box there. Everybody is muted, but you can type your questions, and I will try to get an answer to you right away. And if there's anything I need to break in on Daniel to answer live. But other than that, sir, take it away.
Thank you, Jeremiah. That was very generous of you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Daniel Tal. I'm a landscape architect. I've been using SketchUp for since SketchUp Release 3, which I think was 2003. And this is going to be a SketchUp overview and basics. So I'm going to go over, I'll show you what I'm going to go over with, just to give you a little bit, just to self-plug myself here. I'm a registered landscape architect. I've done a lot of private consulting work on 3D. I'm currently working and contracted with an engineering and landscape architecture firm running a 3D studio. I've authored 2 books on SketchUp. One is called Google SketchUp for Site Design, which technically I'm supposed to be updating and hopefully will get updated next year. And then Rendering in SketchUp, which has been out for about a year and a half. My current side project is something that I've been working on, and my wife is my motivation for this, is at danieltal.com. It's going to be a tutorial website for SketchUp Basics, Introduction to Terrain, and not just overviews, really detailed tutorials covering a whole plethora of SketchUp topics. It's going to be something I'm going to be adding videos to and contributing to over time. So if you're interested in that, I'm just going to quickly, I don't have it up, but go to danieltal.com, sign up, and I will let you know. I'm going to do a beta for the site probably in November with a minimal fee, and always going to be looking for feedback from people in terms of what they can provide. More importantly here, I'm more interested in this tutorial. So I'm going to go over, so I know there might be a bunch of people here that are pretty savvy with SketchUp, intermediate users. We are going to get to you guys over the coming months and doing a lot of these tutorials. I'm going to jump in and go over Intro to SketchUp Basic Principles, which is navigation, selecting objects, what does modeling in 3D mean, and some of the basic tools. And then I'm going to try as best possible do a site design and architectural demo, and also talk about extensions and what extensions are. And I'm going to go through that real quickly here as part of this and kind of reverse engineer my way into it. If time permits, I'm going to try to do a terrain and profile demo. It's a quick and dirty, just to demonstrate the tools, but even with me talking fast, I'm not sure that'll be possible. We'll see. So we're going to get started here with just really the basic principles if you're just starting to use SketchUp for the first time, or if you've been using SketchUp. And the basics class that I do in SketchUp, I've even done it with people that are advanced users, and there's tips and tricks here that are very useful in understanding how SketchUp works. And first and foremost, it's understanding that SketchUp really is learning how to navigate within 3D space. So what you could see on my screen here, and there's a 3 or 4 second pause between my screen and what you guys are seeing, so bear with me on that one. You should see a red cube. And from the fundamental part of SketchUp, I really highly recommend you use a 3-button mouse. If you're a Mac user, go obtain a 3-button mouse. You need to use the SketchUp mouse. You need to use your mouse to actually successfully navigate with SketchUp really quickly. And again, this might seem like a very basic concept, but I'm going to go through this part really quickly. And really the first part of this is if you hold the middle mouse button down, That should give you the orbit icon, and you can see what you can do. You can orbit over the cube. And I'm going to explain why in more detail, why this is all important. Same thing with the 3-button mouse. You can zoom in or out using the middle mouse button, which is the roller wheel. So if you depress it, it's orbit. If you roll it back and forth, it's pretty obvious what it does. It'll zoom in or out. And last, if you hold the middle mouse button down and then hold the shift key, that lets you pan SketchUp over, which again is very useful in terms of how you work. Now, in SketchUp, you do have something, you have all these tool sets that you can open up. And one of them is called the large tool set, which I have open on the left-hand side here. And on the large tool set, there are actually orbit and navigation keys. Don't use them. You need to learn how to use a 3-button mouse, and this is why. Navigating, SketchUp is a 3D modeling program with a 2D interface. And what that means is that you have to actually figure out how to navigate in space. And once you do that, SketchUp really becomes a lot easier to use. I've done this in plenty of classes where learning how to navigate has made all the difference in how people learn. And I'm going to talk about the principles here very quickly. And that means when you're modeling in SketchUp, the one thing I see people do quite often, and we're going to let my screen catch up here, is they put their models off to the side, it's at 10,000 feet, and then they're trying to model. Very difficult way to work in SketchUp. What you need to do when you're working in SketchUp is keep everything that you're working on centered on your screen. Centered on your screen. Basic principle. Centered on your screen and zoomed in. I typically work with a little bit of a bird's eye view with the object centered on my screen. And the way that that works with navigating with a 3-button mouse is very simple. So I'm going to zoom out here, and we're going to do a round robin going to all these different colored cubes. So I'm going to put my cursor over the blue cube, and that's an important thing about zooming in with SketchUp. It's contextual. Wherever you point your mouse is where you're going to zoom. And one key factor to that, if you ever have a hard time navigating in SketchUp, don't put your cursor over white empty space, or you're going to have a hard time navigating in SketchUp to where you want to go. SketchUp wants to be over an object, a geometry, an edge, or a line. And I'm going to explain that in a lot of detail in the next part of this tutorial. So really quickly, I'm going to zoom in on the blue cube. I'll let my screen catch up here. You'll kind of see it as a little bit of a slideshow. And then the one thing about my cube is I'm panning to center it on my screen. Then I'll orbit around my cube. I'll zoom back out, but I'm keeping it centered at all times. So you'll see it orbit around, and then it'll zoom back out a little. And then I'll just do that really quickly to the green cube. I'm panning over to the green cube. I point my cursor at it. I zoom in, and again, you're going to see it just quickly update here in a second. And that's a very basic principle of how you function with SketchUp. Really simple in terms of navigation. You want to keep everything centered on your screen, up close and personal, and you want to use a 3-button mouse to navigate. Just very important basic concept of how SketchUp works. It makes all the difference in the world when you're working with SketchUp. And there's also another reason why you want to use a 3-button mouse to navigate, but I'm not going to go into that, just to say it makes working with the SketchUp tools easier. The next basic concept has to do with understanding how to select objects, and on top of selecting objects, what is geometry in SketchUp. And this is fairly important for us to understand here. So in SketchUp, basically, I'm going to take the rectangle tool, I'm going to draw a rectangle. We'll let that catch up in a second. You'll see that I'll have a rectangle drawn on the screen. There it is. And SketchUp, basically what it did when I used the rectangle tool is it created a surface and these edges that compose the surface. SketchUp is what's called a surface modeling program. I'm going to take another tool on the large tool set called the push-pull tool. I'm going to extrude it up, and once you'll see the extrusion, it looks like you have this illusion of a solid object, but the reality is if I select the top surface of this cube and hit the delete key, it's actually hollow on the inside. That's why it's called a surface modeling program. And that's important to understand because what you're going to be doing a lot in SketchUp is selecting these surfaces and these lines or edges that compose the surfaces. So that becomes an important thing when you start working with SketchUp. And again, real quickly, I'm going to go over this, is you need to learn how to select objects in SketchUp effectively. The best understanding of this is, again, if you right-click on your menus on top, you should generally be working with the large tool set open. I'm going to wait for that to catch up. You'll see that I'm highlighting it here. Here's the large tool set. It's the tool set on the left-hand side. It's a very simple tool set to use. It contains most of the SketchUp tools. And the most important tool on there that you're going to use often is the Select tool, the black arrow on the top left-hand side of the menu. And if you're into shortcuts, which I highly recommend that you get into shortcuts when you're working with SketchUp, if you tap the spacebar or pound the spacebar several times, sometimes it sticks, it will always give you the Select tool for you to use. And selecting objects is simple. Click on an object and it's selected. You're left clicking. Now that's the basic way to select an object. You can also select edges and surfaces. And I do a lot of terrain modeling in SketchUp. Learning how to select objects becomes paramount when you're doing terrain modeling. And in this case, that includes holding down the Shift key with the Select tool will give you a plus and a minus icon. And what that means is you can additively create an additive selection. So you can select an object, and then you can go ahead and you can select additional surfaces and objects to that, adding to the selection. So the Shift key is important in allowing you to select multiple objects. It also allows you to deselect objects once they've been selected. So I can just run over and deselect the objects I selected. And that's what holding the Shift key down using the Select tool does. Very important concept, again, and very similar to the Shift key is actually holding down the Control key. And what that does is the same thing as the Shift tool, except it will not deselect an object once you select it. So very important to understand how that works, because you're going to use the Shift and the Control key to always select objects. Really quickly, there's a number of different ways to actually select objects in SketchUp. If you double click on an object, it will select the surface and the edges that compose a surface. You're going to see that real quickly as I go through it here. Sorry if it appears like a slideshow. The connection here sometimes can be a bit slower from my location. And that's another way that you can select objects. So that's a very basic overview of how to select things in SketchUp. And really, this isn't intended as a hands-on demo, so I'm going to keep going here. I just want to get you used to all the different kinds of things that you can do here. So the next thing we're going to do is actually, we're going to model these steps, but I'm going to go over two tools in tandem that you'll use quite often. One of them is the rectangle tool. Click on the rectangle tool on the large tool set. It lets you pick the first point and then the second point, and you can create a surface. Then you can take the push-pull tool, and with the push-pull tool, you can extrude that surface up, and you can actually enter a distance, or for example, I'll type in 15 feet. So there's a whole measurement system in SketchUp that allows you to actually accurately enter dimensions for line lengths, for extrusions, for moving and copying objects, rotating objects, and it's always, and so everything you're doing in SketchUp is always going to be somewhat parametric in terms of adding values to it. And this works particularly well because one of the things you're going to do often is actually import in your CAD drawings from various CAD sources, which are going to be accurate, measured, drafted line work. And from there, you're going to actually, want to continue to be accurate in the way that you're extruding and drawing objects. What I'm doing here is just really quickly drawing rectangles on the top of this cube, and what I'm doing is something called subdividing the surfaces. And by subdividing the surfaces, I'm able to select them separately, and since I didn't do any measurements, let's just have a little fun by quickly extruding all these different objects and surfaces out. And this is the last time. If you try this little exercise, you'll have fun with SketchUp, because by that point, you'll have to start doing everything parametrically and adding values, which always takes more time. But you could see what SketchUp is able to do once you start push-pulling objects and creating these extrusions. Okay, so continuing with this process of modeling, I'm going to really quickly model these steps. I'm going to use the push-pull tool. So this was very quickly drafted in SketchUp, 1 foot treads. We're going to extrude them at 6-inch heights. I simply extrude the surface and type 6 inches. And what you could do with SketchUp is SketchUp actually likes to repeat the last command. So if I start double-clicking on these surfaces, I can quickly extrude these steps upward at 6-inch intervals. And this really, I'm starting to touch upon what I would call SketchUp workflow. And the workflow has to do with not just being able to model things in SketchUp when you're first doing it, but also becoming very efficient and quick at it. I once had to model some villa in Italy, had about 200 steps, and I did it a very slow method, and then someone showed me, well, hey, there's a different way of doing this, and this is one way of doing it through the double-click method. So you could see I'm just quickly extruding these surfaces, and there you go, using the push-pull tool, I was able to create these steps. I can now add these cheek walls on both sides, and you can see how quickly you could start using SketchUp to actually create all these surfaces. And SketchUp has all these different abilities in terms of being able to modify geometry, not just the square geometry. So we're going to actually take these cheek walls and we're going to slope them down. I'm selecting the edges. I'm using the move tool to slope them down. And again, there's no way for me to actually do in 1 hour, be like, hey, this is a step-by-step process. That's why I'm creating tutorials on my website to show people precisely how to do this in a very fast manner. So you could see a little bit of morphing in the geometry. I'm not going to worry about that, but how quickly you can actually do this in SketchUp. So if I do, you can undo in SketchUp. So I'm going to hold down Alt Backspace, and it'll quickly undo what I just did. And then I can go back and doing Control Y to redo. I can rebuild my steps, just showing you how that worked. So again, using the rectangle tool, the push-pull tool, you can quickly create all these different objects. So we're going to keep going here. I have all these tutorials that I want to make sure that I go through. So let's keep going with this basics overview. So really important concept in SketchUp. If you're used to AutoCAD, if you're used to working in Revit or Vectorworks or Dynascape, or whatever program that you're using blocks and symbols to represent different types of elements. So you'll have a 2D, for example, bench outline or a silhouette for a tree. And one of the things, SketchUp has an equivalent, and these are called components. And understanding components in SketchUp is actually paramount to using it correctly. Because components, for one thing, you're not going to create a site plan. If I go back to my image at the very beginning here, and we're going to wait for my screen to catch up so you could see it. But when you're going to create all your different types of site models and all your different types of site amenities, one of the things that you're going to do in SketchUp is you're not going to go ahead and model the car. You're not going to model the pedestrian light. There might be times where you're going to create a custom element, but you really want to just model your site plan. And so you're going to go ahead and go get all this vegetation, all these components from something called 3D Warehouse. And 3D Warehouse is very simple to use. It's a giant repository of free models for SketchUp. And there's a lot of different types of models on 3D Warehouse. And it's under File, 3D Warehouse, File, 3D Warehouse. And you can type in a search term. I'm going to type in 2D tree in my search area and click on search. And it's going to bring up so many options, and you can download these in directly into your SketchUp model. So my screen's catching up to what I'm actually saying, so we're going to wait here for a second for it to completely catch up. There you go. You could see there are the 2D trees. There's 3D trees that I use as well. There's cars. There's people. You could type in just about anything. There's the latest statistic that we got from the SketchUp team was that there's 1 billion visitors a year downloading models from 3D Warehouse, so very worth using. I also have my own separate collections. That's going to be for a future webinar about specific plants. There are plant species examples available for SketchUp that are based off very Latin common names. So just something to keep in mind and consider when you're working with these particular objects. So what are components? Components are the items in the entourage that you're going to spread around your model to add all the detail that you want. So again, very important in the context of what you're doing here. Navigation, selecting, using rectangle tool and push-pull, and then understanding what components are. So all these are components. I can simply select an object, and then I can move it around. You can scale them, you can adjust them. There's a scale tool in SketchUp, so you can really start modifying what this does. So as a basic overview, that's really the primary part of SketchUp and what we're going to do. I'm going to keep moving right along here. And speaking of vegetation, and this is an important concept if you're a lot of landscape architects, or even if you're just using a lot of 3D modeling. I'm going to wait for my screen to catch up here. You should be able to see that I have a 3D tree, something called a 2.5D tree, and then something called a 2D face me tree. And this is a really important concept because I know when I first started using SketchUp, and this was, wow, 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of components that you're seeing available now. So trying to find the right tree was hard. At this point, there's so many types of trees for SketchUp and vegetation and shrubs. You have a lot of choices, so it's important to understand the differences between these types of vegetation. The first one is the shrub and the 2D tree on the right over here. If I pan and if I look down at my model, straight down at my model, what you're going to see once the view catches up is the 2D tree and the 2D shrub are wafer thin. They actually don't have any 3D aspect to them except that they're elevated in vertical space. And what these are is when I turn the camera and I rotate the camera, what they do is they will face the camera whenever I'm actually moving around. And that's a great thing in terms of SketchUp performance because these don't impact, they're not what we would call very heavy geometry models versus the 3D tree on the far left, which I'm focusing on now, where every single piece of leaf, every aspect of the branch is modeled. And the very simple way of understanding why this is important is this. If you take this 3D tree and copy it in your model 10 times, it will start impacting the performance of how SketchUp functions because there's so much information in the model. Now, there are ways to work around that, which I go over in a lot of tutorials, which we're going to go over on some of the land effects tutorials of organizing your models. And the other side of it is these 3D trees are great. Landscape architects, knowing who we are, we're always going to go for the best aesthetic that we can for our model. However, that doesn't necessarily mean not to use the 2D face me trees and shrubs, or these 2.5D trees, which are really images of branches and leaves that compose the illusion of actually creating a 3D tree. And it does have, it is technically speaking 3D, it's just the way it was arranged and created is using these different transparent PNG images to create the illusion of branches. So something to keep in mind if you're, and this is my last suggestion about trees in terms of if you're first starting to use SketchUp, use 2D trees. I know you're going to want to use the 3D trees. Use the 2D trees first. It's a great way to start, and they're actually really cool for conceptual modeling. I use 2D trees all the time for many of my models. So something to consider again in everything that we're going over in terms of the context of this, because I know you're going to rush out and get as many trees as you can from the 3D warehouse. The next thing, and this is moving into a little bit more of an advanced concept in SketchUp, and it's called extensions. And I'm going to demonstrate an extension here, and then I'm going to go ahead and spend the remainder of the time pretty much showing you how I modeled this site plan, including, this sloping, graded walk that you'll see in a second as I zoom in. And we're going to talk about this. So what are extensions? Not to confuse it, the great debate that I've had with some of the SketchUp team people is, do you introduce extensions to people that are new to SketchUp off the bat? And my answer is absolutely. At this day and age, there is no reason why not to introduce extensions. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation here. I'm going to wait for the screen to catch up. I can tell what people are seeing, which is nice. We know where you are. No, I'm just kidding. So SketchUp extensions really are apps. So if you have a smartphone, think of SketchUp as a smartphone. What do you do with your smartphone? Well, with your smartphone, you actually use apps. Your basic smartphone and SketchUp are very simple. They do not come loaded with tools or programs and objects. What they do come with is this blank slate that's a very simple tool. What you can do with your smartphone and what you can do with SketchUp is actually customize the way that they function. And how do you make them customizable? and I'm sorry, before I make them customizable. And by making them customizable, you can make them very diverse in terms of how they function. So you can use your iPhone for spreadsheets, for photo editing, for whatever type of thing that you want to do. We all know there's an app out there for just about everything. SketchUp is the same way. There's probably on average 2 million dedicated SketchUp users using it for just about anything you can conceive of, and most of those really dedicated users are using SketchUp apps. So SketchUp Extensions are like smartphone apps, right? You go download the app, you put it into your smartphone, and then you can use it. SketchUp has their version of an app store, the Apple App Store, for example, and it's called the Extension Warehouse. And I'm going to demonstrate really quickly what that means. Like 3D Warehouse, you can go get apps for SketchUp. And honestly, the best way to learn SketchUp and do this, and this is dangerous to actually suggest this, so you can email me and curse me out for suggesting this, but go to the Extension Warehouse, start downloading some extensions, playing with them. You'll have to figure out how to turn them off at some point, but don't worry about that. And because I'm going to demonstrate how powerful extensions can actually be. And just to reiterate this concept, because I think it's important, even if you're new to SketchUp, is SketchUp is simple out of the box. That's the large tool set. It doesn't have a lot of menus in it. It really comes as this kind of blank painting canvas that you can plug in all your paintbrushes into and do what you want with it. And really what you want to do with it is it from spreadsheets, parametric modeling, organic modeling, animations, simulations, renderings. Those are all apps. And in fact, Land Effects has an extension on the Extension Warehouse. So if you go to the Extension Warehouse, I'll show you where it is. We're going to let my screen catch up, and it's called the Land Effects plugin. And if you're going to start using SketchUp for site design modeling, I highly recommend you get this extension and start using it. It's a free extension, and it lets you start loading up site amenities, vegetation, all the things that I'm talking about. Here's an extension that helps you get more objects that you can use. An extension that like that is very useful. So just something to keep in mind with the Land Effects extension is very useful. If you're interested and if you're already using SketchUp and you're interested in extensions, here's my top 5 extensions that I use and I don't live without. And if we get to the end of this with more time, I'll actually demonstrate these 5 extensions. But Selection Toys I have highlighted. It's a more advanced extension. I cannot use SketchUp without it. It's a very powerful way. I actually have dedicated tutorials to Selection Toys because of what it does, and it just makes SketchUp a lot easier. So that's my 2 cents on extensions. And just to show you where the Extension Warehouse is, I'm going to drop right back into SketchUp here. And if you go to Window, Extension Warehouse, Window Extension Warehouse. I'm not going to open it up because it will take up some bandwidth, and we're already kind of straining the bandwidth here for what we're trying to do, so I'm not going to actually do that. But Extension Warehouse, like the 3D Warehouse, which is under File, Get Models, 3D Warehouse, you can go and start installing these tools and extensions into SketchUp. So that's really the basic overview of what we just over with. And based off that, we can actually model this site plan. Well, first and foremost, I'm going to show you one of my favorite extensions, and it's called Instant Roof New. Now, one of the things you're going to do, since we're not architects, we're landscape architects, and even architects have a hard time modeling roofs in SketchUp. Well, just to show you how fast that can be accomplished, I'm going to extrude this surface up 11 feet. It's a basic building footprint. I'm going to let that catch up. And this is not a free extension. It's called Instant Roof New. It's actually for purchase from an individual named Chuck Valley or Valley Architects. Again, I don't want you to worry too much about that. You can email me and I can send you the information about that. Or again, sign up on my site. I am doing tutorials and all this stuff. Again, I don't mean to keep plugging that. I apologize. But I'm going to select the top surface of this extruded volume. I'm going to click on Make Roof. And it's going to allow me to choose from a bunch of preset roof styles that I can apply to my model. Very simple to do, especially if you're just trying to create really quick context. So I'm going to select one called Hacienda 2 or Hacienda 1. I click OK. I click on Make Roof. And with one click, it will make my roof for me. We'll bring up a little dialog box and say, hey, I made your roof for you. And we'll see it in a second. There you go. There's my roof. Really simple to do. That's the powers of extensions in SketchUp, and that's the end of my spiel about extensions. So what's the power in SketchUp? Let's move on to this last portion of all this. And the power of SketchUp is really the ability to model concepts very quickly. At this point, and I used to do all my drafting in AutoCAD, import that into SketchUp, and that's really the primary way you're going to model most of your site plans. And there's a method and a process to that madness as well, and using extensions that help. And it doesn't matter if it's AutoCAD, Vectorworks, Dynarscape, Revit, whatever. You can import them all into SketchUp and you can model it. I've come to the point where I can actually draft in SketchUp these concepts very quickly. And just to show you what that means, here I have a surface that is 150 feet by 150 feet. It's really based off this. And I'm going to go through the tools that I'm using. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting the outer edges of this surface, selecting the outer edges of the surface. I'm going to let my screen catch up here so you can see it. So I'm going to do this slowly and methodically, which is unusual for me to go slow. I'll try my best. I apologize. And then I'm going to take from the large tool set, I'm hovering over it. It's called the offset tool. And offset should be pretty self-explanatory in what it does. And I'm going to offset these two edges that are selected 30 feet. So you type in a value, again, everything's parametric, and it offsets it, and it does another thing for me here. It subdivides both of the surfaces. So now we have what I'm going to call my road, and then I have my interior lot. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to model that. Again, I'm going to select these edges, and I'm going to take the offset tool again, and I'm going to offset this over 6 inches. Because I'm going to add a curb. And let me explain what I mean by that. I love adding as much possible detail into my models. The more detail you add, the more realistic it's going to come out. So adding curbs is always great. Boundaries for areas. I'm going to select those edges again. And now I'm going to add an 8-foot tree lawn. So I'm using the offset tool with the selected edges. At the bottom right, I simply start typing the distance I want it to offset. It offsets at 8 feet, and there's going to be my tree lawn. I'm going to select those edges again, take the offset tool, and I'm going to offset these out another 8 feet, and that's my walk. So there's my first part of what I'm trying to do here. And next, I'm going to add a curb, So I'm going to draw some drafting lines here, some lines for me to reference going out. And here's the important thing about working with SketchUp that's worth mentioning right now. Whether you're drafting this in SketchUp or whether you're importing in your CAD drawing, you're essentially going from 2D to 3D. You're using your 2D to reference because that's the best way to conceive of something. When something's in 2D, you add these surfaces, you extrude them, then you can have fun figuring out how to create the rest of the extrusions that represent your site. But in this case, what I'm doing is just drafting all this out. You can now see I have a bunch of subdivided surfaces out here. I'm going to take the eraser tool from the large tool set, and I'm going to erase some of these lines because now we want to add, using the arc tool, we want to add just a radius here. And we now have a very simple road, walk, tree lawn, and curb. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. We're going to keep going here actually because our goal here is to mimic what I created here, which will let my screen catch up to what I'm showing you here. There you go. So I'm redrafting this. And that means because we have a curb ramp in this area. Going to let my screen catch up. So this is where you have to put your landscape architecture hat and be like, well, what details do I need here? I'm going to select this edge. I'm using something called the move tool. I'm copying it over 6 inches. That's going to be my curb return. And we're going to keep going. So next, I'm going to add a perimeter wall to this whole thing. Well, I showed you how to use the offset tool to select edges. Well, the beautiful thing about the offset tool in SketchUp is it lets you offset surfaces. And the tools, again, that I'm using primarily for what we're doing here is the rectangle tool, move tool, push pull, and offset. Really, that's all you're doing to model this basic site plan. So with offset, if I select this surface, I'm going to wait for it to get selected on my screen, I take the offset tool and I'm offsetting it. It's offsetting the edges that compose the surface. Offset it 1 foot. I now have a perimeter wall around my site, and I'm ready to do the rest of this process in here now. So what we're going to do is add color, and then we're going to add the rest of the detail to this. So next, I'm going to take the paint bucket tool icon. This is to add color to your surfaces. And I'm simply going to just use some basic colors here. You can go to the pull-down menu. You see it says markers. You could see sketchy, roof, metal. So there's a whole bunch of predetermined materials already in SketchUp that you can use and apply to your surfaces. I'm going to select from the color menu some basic colors that we're going to apply. And one of the things, here's part of an important process when you're modeling in SketchUp. And I'm a tired record with this particular method, but in SketchUp, if you have a surface and you don't apply a color to it, so here I drew a rectangle and I don't apply a color to it and I just extrude it, now what happens after I extrude it is, for example, I'm going to take this red color, I actually have to apply a color to all 5, or technically speaking, all 6 sides. Versus, if I undo all this, if you apply the color to a surface first, and then extrude it, and I'm going to wait for my screen to catch up so everyone's on the same page, apply the color, and then extrude the surface, what happens is that color is now applied to all sides of that object uniformly. You don't have to spend the time. That actually saves you have no idea. That will save you a lot of time. So if you're new to SketchUp, just keep that in mind. So in this case, before I start extruding everything here, on my site plan, I'm going to quickly add colors to it to define the curb, to define the walks and the tree lawn. I'm going to use my vegetation material palette here. We'll apply a wall color as well. Whoops, got a little too excited here in terms of what I just did. Let's reapply that. There we go. I'm going to go to my stone material. We're going to apply a stone to our wall. And we now have our basic site plan that we can continue to manipulate and add more detail to. So we're going to do that next. I'm going to place my house. I made it what's called a component, like we were talking about, and I'm placing it on my site plan here. But now, before we start adding stuff to this, before we put this house fully on here, we want to start extruding things. So I'm going to move the house back out of the way. Just wanted to show you can move it. I'm going to depress the road. Actually, we're going to elevate everything 6 inches. So here we're using the push-pull tool. I'm double-clicking. And we're going to push-pull everything but the road. So all the curbs, the tree lawn, and there you have it. Everything's now extruded. Then I'm going to extrude my wall up 3 feet and the yard behind it 3 feet. So we've just created our first basic site plan. It wasn't very hard for us to do. Next, now I'll select the house. And I'm going to move it over. And now we can continue to add more details to this. So first and foremost, I'm going to take the rectangle tool and just draw my entryway. And again, all I'm using is the rectangle tool to subdivide the surface out here. You'll see that in a second. I'm going to take a color. I could sample the color in the paint bucket menu using the eyedropper. And next I can continue to add lines. And the way that you can draft in SketchUp fairly effectively here, and I didn't go over something called the inference system because we don't have enough time, but what I'm using is the move tool to copy and move edges. I'm going to add my color to this as well. Wait for it to catch up. You'll see that I just created a surface, so I'm drafting on the extruded surfaces, not very hard to do, on the wall. And next we're going to add some walls to this. I'm going to extrude this surface down, and I'm going to push this back. And we're just getting ready to add the steps, and we just did a steps exercise. So I'm going to select this edge, and I'm going to use the move tool to copy it. So this is called the move tool. I have a whole set of dedicated tutorials to that. It's a really powerful tool in terms of what you do and how often you have to use it in SketchUp. If you tap the control key, it puts a plus sign next to it, and I can simply extrude it. And what we're going to do is extrude this up now 6 inches to add all our steps. And it's not a very hard process to do. Just doing 6-inch intervals. My wall was 3 feet in height. Hopefully I got this right, and we'll get to the top of the landing correctly. If not, we just delete and we start over. And we can push that forward now. That's weird why it's not snapping. There we go. And then on top of it, I can add additional detail since we need cheek walls on the side here. So I'm actually going to add those as well. Just copying lines over, 1 foot interval, drawing a line, and adding a wall to it, and do that on both sides. And you can see in real time how fast it is for me to just quickly draw these very basic concepts in SketchUp to get to this point. And we can keep going by adding even more levels of detail to this. So not very hard to do. So the next thing we could do is we're going to add planting areas here. I'm going to simply take the arc tool and draw really outrageous, exaggerated planting beds. Maybe we have a deck on the back side of this house as well. You know, again, for a lot of people, and just to emphasize this point, what you're going to end up doing is really using your CAD drawing to leverage what you want to do here to create many of your site plans. And that's not a difficult thing to do. It is learning some of the nuances on how SketchUp works. So for example, right there, what I ended up doing was hiding the house. So, you know, just a little bit more of a basic tooltip there. You can hide and unhide objects in SketchUp, and that makes it easier for you to start working in it. Did a really poor job on putting my planting bed in here, so I'm going to add a little bit more. Then I'm going to go and add a color to it. So we'll go to ground cover from our materials, and we'll add ground cover. And we can go to wood because we have a wood deck maybe in the back. And you could see that we have our basic concept starting to get fleshed out even more. So again, how did I get to this point? I'm really using the large tool set. I'm drafting out my concept, and this is a great way to start learning SketchUp. First way, think of some kind of just really quick design you want to do. Use these tools. Use the paint bucket tools. Second way to actually learn SketchUp effectively, take one of your projects, take a past project. If you have a CAD drawing in particular, import it into SketchUp. Just as a reminder, I am using SketchUp Pro, and under File Import is where you can import in different file types. However, the free version of SketchUp called SketchUp Make has very limited number of import options. If you want to import in your CAD drawing into SketchUp, you do need the ability to have, you do need SketchUp Pro. There is a trial for SketchUp Pro, but for example, you can import AutoCAD DWF files or 3ds and a whole other plethora of different types. So it's just something to keep in mind if you do want to do and take one of your import drawings. There's also a bit more of a process working with CAD drawings. You want to clean them up a little, use an extension to create the faces. And again, that's going to be another webinar I'm going to do with Land Effects to show you precisely how to do that. So next part of this is adding another level of detail to this. And I want to demonstrate another extension. And this is another not free extension, so I apologize for that. But again, these extensions cost anywhere from $5 to $10 to $30. They don't really cost all that much. And just to keep in mind, 90% of the extensions that I'm talking about are actually free. So in this case, I just simply drew 2 lines along this wall. I'm going to go to an extension here called Instant Fence and Railing, and it parametrically lets me make or choose from a predetermined number of fencing options, and with one click I can actually model that fence. So you could see it right there. Did that in one click. You'll see it update in a second here. Very simple, very quick. So it's this combination of the SketchUp modeling tools and using extensions that really lets you start leveraging this program in a very quick and fast way. Last, what we're going to do here is we're going to actually add some detail to this model. So I'm actually going to take these benches. I'm going to use palms because I never use palms, but might as well, and some shrubs, and we're going to bring these into our model. And the last thing that you end up doing in SketchUp really is you start entouraging it. And there's a very quick way to actually entourage models in SketchUp using, for example, blocks. And what I mean by entourage, let me show you this last detailed model. This was the model that you saw the image for in the beginning. This is an entourage model. This whole model took roughly half an hour to actually construct. You can see I'm constructing most of it in front of you right now. But it includes 3D trees, it has the fence, it has 2D shrubs, so I'm combining the 2D and the 3D vegetation to create what I want. I've added textures and windows to the building. Again, not very difficult to do. And there's a lot even more detail on the roof. Using the Instant Roof plugin, I was able to actually create a tiled terracotta-esque kind of roof. So that's really when you start having the structure and the bones of your model complete, the last thing that you're going to do is then start entouraging and add all your detail to it. So I'm going to actually add my components into here. And again, I could talk about components and how to get and insert these objects into SketchUp ad infinitum. You're going to see that in the view here in a second as SketchUp updates. I pasted in these components. Again, that's a whole separate tutorial, and I actually have free tutorials about that online. Just email me and I could show you more about components and where to get plants. And then all you simply do is you start entouraging your model using the Move tool, the Copy tool. For example, what I'm going to do here is place this palm on my block here. I'm going to use the Move tool and copy it over. And then by moving it over a certain distance, I can then also do something called an array command. And I can instantly create this linear caption of tools here with one click. So that's the power of using SketchUp in a nutshell and doing all this type of modeling. I'm skipping out some details, obviously, just to show you the quick overview and how this all works. It's not very difficult to get started with SketchUp, to just start taking these tools and start working with them to create some kind of basic landform. Just to show you one more level of detail here, and this is where you can start learning about doing organic modeling in SketchUp using something called the sandbox tools. So we're going to quickly create a curb cut. I'm sorry, a ramp. I'm going to extrude this down. And the sandbox tools, if you right-click on SketchUp, they're part of the free version as well, the pro version. They're called sandbox. I'm right-clicking on them right now. You'll see it in the tool menu here. And I can simply select this edge, and I can select this top edge as well. So this is like my bottom of my grade, my top of my grade. That's essentially what it is, and that's what grading in SketchUp really is. And you can, I do grading constantly in SketchUp. I don't believe that there's a flat surface in reality, so everything has grades, and I can simply, with one click, create my grading profile for myself in SketchUp without too much trouble. And now I have a ramp. So I'm really going ahead and adding, just again, all sorts of detail into this model with really a couple of clicks. This includes being able to do road striping, adding all the vegetation all in one click. So that's the power of doing the site plans in SketchUp. But I want to demonstrate something, and this is a new demonstration for me, so bear with me, because I have 10 more minutes, and we'll keep it open for questions. But really, how you could start leveraging SketchUp to create very powerful, very quick models that are very expressive. And this isn't a demonstration. Again, SketchUp Extensions, and I keep coming back to extensions. I know this is a little bit more of an intermediate topic. Extensions tend to intimidate people, but really shouldn't be. They are the backbone of how you can really get faster with SketchUp. So for example, I'm going to take the arc tool here, and I'm going to draw 2 arcs. Now, the one thing about these arcs, if I zoom in on them, and you'll see them in a second here, is that they're not connected. They're 2 separate polylines. Well, there's an extension in SketchUp called Weld. It's a free extension. You can get it from the extension warehouse. Again, it's called Weld, and what it does is basically as self-explanatory. It will weld these 2 arcs together. Perfect. Really powerful in what it just did. Very useful. Now, let's say I want to array. I have some nice 3D trees here. Let's say I want to array this tree along this arc. SketchUp doesn't do that natively. What you have to do is get another extension. And again, I'm going over extensions at the end just to feed the more advanced users here about what's going on. I hope the basic users got what you want. Again, ask me questions, email me. But under plugins, I have another extension, and this one is called Copy Along Path or Path Copy. I'm going to select Copy to Spacing. I'm going to wait for my menu here to select Catch Up. I'm going to type in a spacing of 30 feet and hit Enter. I then select the edge or the 2 welded arcs, and then I select the tree, and SketchUp will now array those trees for me along that curved surface. Beautiful. That's exactly what you want. And then you can actually use another extension to randomize the habit of all these trees. Another really cool and powerful extension, and I might not get to demonstrate it fully in how this works in terms of this particular tutorial, but it's called Soap Bubble. All you see here are 4 edges that compose this surface. This is an amazing tool. This is Soap Bubble. There's a free demo and trial of it on the extension warehouse. Just type in Soap Skin Bubble or Soap Bubble. I'm going to click on Skin and then hit Enter. And this is going to create a gridded surface for me that I can now really start adjusting and modeling. What I can do with this surface is fairly powerful. I'm going to select the surface. I'm going to click on Generate Soap Bubble. I'm going to type in 8. It's called a pressure. And what this is going to do is actually inflate. You'll see it inflate or deflate in a second. Or I can inflate the surface to create really interesting, powerful geometry with this. Very powerful tool, really simple to use. The demo is pretty much free, and something that you can do with it ad infinitum. There's one more thing that I want to do, then we'll open this up to questions, and that's to show one more plugin. It's called Profile Builder, and this is by far my current favorite because of what it can do, and it's really simple in what it does. Here I have a sloping set of arcs, right? I can select this profile that I drew, click the plus button. I can now select this curve, and using Profile Builder, it will quickly allow me to extrude that really simple object along this faceted arc or curve. Just to show you how this all works together, because what you'll end up doing is taking your extensions and stringing them together. Here I have a very simple road profile. So this is a road section, quite literally. I have 2 12-foot lanes. I have a curb and gutter. You're going to see it as it catches up here in a second. I have my road. I have my striping. And I did draft this section in a very specific way so it can be extruded along using Profile Builder to create a road. So very simply put, how does this work? Just to show you the power of this tool and what SketchUp can really do with all these. And pray for no crashes. You just never know. Select what I ended up selecting here, and you'll see it in a second on your screens, I selected these two arcs. They are actually welded together. I'm going to extrude that road profile along that arc. Might take a second or two or three or four. Patience with SketchUp is something that will help you and probably reduce your amount of time in purgatory, just saying. And hopefully this will work. If not, that will be the end of my tutorial here anyway. But it should function. This usually does. But what it'll do will actually, there you go, it will create this road profile for me along those edges. You'll see it here in a second. And now I can simply take my colors, and I can apply colors to this, and voila, you have Instant Road. Sorry, poor term, since that's another plugin. We have, well, an Instant Road. So I'll take that back. Here you go. You can add all the color to this that you want, all to the curbs. You get the idea. I'm going to open this up for questions. Thank you very much for having me. Again, just to keep in mind, I know this is a lot of information. I do have a website that I'm launching, at least in beta, in SketchUp, on SketchUp tutorials. It's about time since I'm no longer doing as many live trainings. And I plan to have hours and hours of SketchUp tutorials on here, from SketchUp Basics to advanced terrain modeling, introduction to terrain modeling, rendering, tips and tricks. Something that I'm really working on is called SketchUp FTL, or Faster Than Light, and how to speed yourself up. So go ahead, go to my website, please, and sign up. And thank you very much for having me again. And I know I went a little bit over, but let's open it up for questions.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much, Daniel. You were amazing. And I also want to remind people that you've been on me for now a couple of years to work on some grading plugins, and so I definitely want
yes.
get going. One of these days, if we ever have time, the two of us will actually go over that and come up with some good ones. Not a lot of questions I was able to answer. One that really that bamboozled me. Phil had a great question. He was saying that a lot of 2D face me trees that he's found have a rectangular frame around it, and that prints in black, and he can't figure out how to turn that off. And I was just unclear on what he might be referring to.
So it could be when a lot of them have, and hopefully this is right, there's two aspects he might be mentioning here. Oops, let me go back to SketchUp here. So the first one might be if you turn on the shadows, you might get a really irregular shadow at times. In this particular tree, it's not like that. In this tree, it's a bit more blocky. The other thing is that it has an edge to it. So if you could see, this tree has an edge around it. And that prints out as black. And there's different ways to adjust those under the Styles menu, Window, Styles. One of the things I tell people to do under the Edit menu, and I have it, this is a complicated menu to get to, it's called the Edge Settings, is make sure that none of these other edge styles are turned on. You just want edges. That's number one. So it's Window, Styles. This is a fairly complicated menu, but under the Edit option, you have access to these 5 tabs, and it lets you edit the graphic styles in SketchUp. The other thing is, and this is where I use a Ruby script or an extension called Selection Tools or Selection Toys, what I can do to get rid of this edge is I triple click on the tree, I right click on it, I'm using something called Selection Toys to just select the edges, and then I hide them. And now I have a tree that should do that. And if you're still getting a blocky shadow, that just depends on the component that you're using, and you should explore the different types of 2D components that don't do that. Any other questions? Cool. Hopefully I did a good job.
And that pretty much did it. Everyone's I got about 1 million thank yous coming in from everybody. So I think we really killed it. And reminding everyone, yeah, this is the first of a series. What's our date for the next one? It's in December. Is that right?
It's in December,
Mm.
yes. And I'm not sure what we decided on that one yet, but we're going to go through all the different topics I talked about in this overview in terms of what we're going to go over. So SketchUp to AutoCAD, AutoCAD to SketchUp, animations. SketchUp, actually, just a quick note, if you're using SketchUp 2014 and if you've been using previous versions, SketchUp 2013, SketchUp 2014, they greatly improved the shadow menu and the animation menu, just something to keep in mind. I've been doing a lot more SketchUp animations with it. But yeah. All right, I'll see you all in December, and thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.